of the enzymatic components which are in the inactive form. These inactive enzymes, they are converted into the active enzymes by the enterokinases or the Bros enteropeptidase or enterokinases, that is the Bros border enzymes which are present in the small intestine. They convert the enzymes into the active form, and once active form of the enzymes are produced, they will cleave the dipeptides and tripeptides, okay, tripeptides and dipeptides into the amino acids, okay, amino acids. So amino acids, they are absorbed. Okay, you can look at this figure also. Pepsinogen, it is converted into the pepsin. Okay, HCl is needed for conversion of pepsinogen into proteins. Once pepsin is formed, proteins are cleaved. But once it reaches into the duodenum, due to the presence of bicarbonates, pepsin function is abolished. Okay, the polypeptides, they are converted into the dipeptides and tripeptides and amino acids by the help of the enzymes which are converted into the active form. Okay, which are converted into the active form. So enterokinase, which are present in the Bros border enzymes, they are released, uh, they are helping to convert the inactive form of the enzymes into the active form. Trypsinogen is converted into trypsin, procarboxypeptidase is converted into carboxypeptidase, chymotrypsinogen is converted into chymotrypsin, right? And once there is the digestion, it will convert the dipeptides, tripeptides into the amino acids, and amino acids, they are transported by secondary active transport. Okay, amino acids are transported by the secondary active transport. Sodium amino acid transport, hydrogen amino acid transport. Okay, secondary active transport. So you can look at this figure, right? So proteins, due to the presence of pepsin, it is converted into proteins and oligopeptides. These oligopeptides are converted into the proteins are converted into the oligopeptides by trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase into oligopeptides. So these oligopeptides, they are converted into the dipeptides and tripeptides and amino acids. Okay, amino acids. There are the dipeptidase, amino oligopeptidase, dipeptidase, which converts the dipeptides and tripeptides into the amino acids. So peptides and amino acids. So amino acids, they are transported through the secondary active transport. Peptides, they are also transported through the facilitated diffusion. Right? So this is also the same figure. So proteins, they are converted into peptides. Right? They are transported through the sodium amino acid transport. Small peptides are carried by the transcytosis. Okay, dipeptides and tripeptides, they are co-transported with the hydrogen. Okay, they are co-transported with the hydrogen. There is the transport. Amino acids are transported through the sodium amino acid transport. Right? For working of this sodium amino acid co-transport, there must be primary active transport that is working on the basolateral side. Right? There must be primary active transport that is working on the basolateral side. And this is also not needed. So these are the different types of the amino acids. So neutral, basic, and acidic amino acid. Right? So they are all absorbed. So this is also the same transporter mechanism. So sodium and dipeptides, tripeptides, they are transported. Hydrogen and dipeptides, tripeptides, they are transported co-transport. Okay. Sodium and amino acids, they are transported by the sodium amino acid co-transport, secondary active transport. Right? So sodium potassium pump, it actively pumps free sodium ion out of the cell. Okay, from the apical cell, sodium is absorbed, sodium goes inside the cell. After sodium goes inside the cell, sodium is actively pumped. Right? You can see it here in the figure also. Right? We can see it here in the figure also. Right? Sodium glucose co-transport, there are the sodium amino acid co-transport, there is the sodium hydrogen exchange. Okay, sodium hydrogen exchange, this is also the primary active transport. Right? This is also the type of the primary active transport, sodium hydrogen ATPase. And after entering, sodium after goes inside, okay, sodium, it is pumped through the sodium potassium pump. Right? Sodium is pumped through the sodium potassium pump. So sodium, it moves through the primary active transport, okay, towards the blood. Sodium is absorbed through the primary active transport and through the secondary active transport, right, through the secondary active transport. So this is in case of small intestine. Okay, in small intestine, sodium is absorbed by these mechanism, right? Sodium is absorbed by this mechanism, by primary active transport and by secondary active transport. But in this is also the primary active transport. Okay, so and this occurs in case of the small intestine. But in case of colon, due to the aldosterone, okay, aldosterone, there are the insertion of the sodium potassium, there are the insertion of epithelial sodium channel in the apical side. Okay, in the colon there is the insertion of epithelial sodium channel, and due to the insertion of the epithelial sodium channel, sodium is absorbed. Okay, sodium is absorbed, it goes inside, and once it goes inside the cell, it is again pumped out of the cell to the blood side by the sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, am I clear? Am I clear? Am I clear? कोई तो बोला.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So chloride absorption, it is accompanied by the sodium absorption. Okay, so chloride absorption, it also occurs through the passive diffusion by a paracellular route. Okay, and sodium chloride co-transport and chloride bicarbonate exchange. Okay, right? So chloride chloride transport, it occurs through the paracellular. Okay, this is the, if the electrolytes, they go directly through the cell membrane, it is known as transcellular, right? If absorption takes directly through the apical cells, this is known as transcellular. If absorption goes in between the tight junction, through the tight junction, okay, in between the connection between the two cells, then it is known as paracellular. Okay, it is known as paracellular, right? So it occurs through the passive transport. Okay, because sodium is absorbed. When sodium is absorbed, to maintain the electrical neutrality, chloride is also absorbed. Okay, then sodium chloride exchange is there, and chloride bicarbonate exchange is there. Okay, chloride bicarbonate exchange is there. Chloride also moves inside with the release of the bicarbonate. Okay, there is the chloride bicarbonate exchange. So sodium, it moves through the sodium glucose co-transport. Okay, once sodium moves inside, chloride also moves through the paracellular pathway to maintain the electrical neutrality. Okay, right, to maintain the electrical neutrality, because sodium is the positive ion. So to maintain the electrical neutrality, chloride also diffuses inside, right? Sodium, it is transported through the transcellular pathway with the exchange of the glucose with the secondary active transport. Okay, sodium glucose co-transport, sodium amino acid co-transport, sodium hydrogen counter transport, sodium potassium ATPase. Okay, sodium potassium ATPase, right? And in the colon, there are the epithelial cells. In the epithelial cells, due to the action of the hormone aldosterone, there are the insertion of the epithelial sodium channels, which absorbs the sodium, Okay, chloride, it is transported through the paracellular pathway. Okay, chloride, it is transported either through the paracellular pathway, it is transported either through the chloride bicarbonate exchange. Okay, chloride bicarbonate exchange, right? Now absorption and secretion of potassium. So dietary potassium is again absorbed in the small intestine by passive diffusion through the paracellular route. Okay, in the small intestine, it goes through the paracellular route, right? Through the paracellular route, there is the absorption of the potassium, right? There is the absorption of the potassium. Then in the colon, there is the active secretion of the potassium. Okay, there is the active secretion of the potassium. So in the colon, due to the hormone aldosterone, sodium is absorbed, whereas potassium is secreted. Okay, potassium is secreted, whereas sodium is absorbed due to the hormone aldosterone. So in diarrhea, right, whenever there is diarrhea, the potassium secretion is increased. Okay, potassium secretion is increased and it causes hypokalemia. Okay, in diarrhea, there is excessive potassium secretion which causes hypokalemia. Okay? Then absorption of water. Okay, absorption of water. So absorption of water, it is secondary to the solute absorption. Whenever there is absorption of sodium, then water is also osmotically dragged. Okay, water is also osmotically dragged because water is osmotically active particle. Right? Water is osmotically dragged. When sodium moves inside the cell, water is also dragged. So to maintain the isoosmotic condition, okay, to maintain the isoosmotic condition with the plasma, water is dragged. Otherwise, the cells become hyperosmolar. Okay, right? The tonicity of the cells increases. So to maintain the isoosmotic condition, water is moved along with the electrolytes or solute. Okay. Wherever solute moves, water also moves. When sodium is absorbed, when chloride is absorbed, water also moves. Okay. So it is mainly seen in the small intestine and in the gallbladder. Right? The water is absorbed. About 7,000 ml of water is absorbed. Right? Water and all the substances are the same absorbed. Okay. So in the colon, T is lower than the small intestine. Right? Water composition is water content permeability is lower than the small intestine, and the feces or the stool may be hypertonic. Right? So this is the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Look at this figure. Right? So maximum amount of water absorption occurs in the jejunum, then ileum, then duodenum. Right? Maximum amount of water absorption occurs in the jejunum, then ileum. Sodium absorption occurs in the jejunum, right? Maximum. Sodium and chloride. Sodium and chloride, they occur maximum in the jejunum. Then potassium absorption occurs maximum in the jejunum. Right? Potassium absorption occurs in the jejunum. Then in the colon, due to the presence of the hormone aldosterone, there is the absorption of the sodium and secretion of the potassium. Okay, potassium is secreted. In the colon, due to the presence of the aldosterone, there is absorption of the sodium. Okay, there is absorption of the sodium. Right? Here potassium is here potassium is here potassium is absorbed, here potassium is secreted, and sodium is absorbed. Okay, and bicarbonate, they are exchanged. Okay, chloride through the chloride bicarbonate exchanger. Right? Bicarbonate is exchanged to the chloride bicarbonate exchanger. In the duodenum is also absorbed in the duodenum. Okay, absorption of water is in duodenum, ileum, colon. So you have to answer the absorption of calcium and the absorption of iron occurs in duodenum, jejunum, ileum, colon. So you have to tick on the duodenum. Right? So this mainly these two, water absorption and iron absorption, it is important. Right? Water absorption and iron absorption is important. This question have been asked many times. Right? Absorption of water. Right? Absorption of water, it has been asked many times. Water and this iron also. Right? In the colon, sodium absorption is through the aldosterone mechanism. Aldosterone is the hormone that is secreted from the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal gland. Zona glomerulosa of the adrenal gland. Aldosterone helps in insertion of epithelial sodium channels. Okay, it helps in insertion of the epithelial sodium channels. Right? Aldosterone, it helps in insertion of the epithelial sodium channels, and there is the absorption of the sodium. Okay, there is the absorption of the sodium in the colon, and the absorption of potassium, it is also through the aldosterone mechanism. There is active secretion of the potassium. Okay, there is active secretion of the potassium with the absorption of the sodium. Okay, active secretion of the potassium with the absorption of sodium. Right? So this is also the same figure. Look at this figure. Sodium is reabsorbed from the epithelial cells. Okay, sodium is reabsorbed from the epithelial cells. Once sodium is absorbed, it goes through the sodium potassium pump to the interstitial space. Okay, interstitial space. The sodium accumulates in the interstitial space. Once sodium accumulates in the interstitial space, there is the osmotic drag of water. Okay, there is the drag of water because sodium is osmotically active particle and it drags the water, and after water comes, it is absorbed into the blood. Okay, it is absorbed into the blood. Am I clear? Whatever, either sodium goes inside or chloride goes inside. Sodium, mainly sodium and chloride, they are the osmotically active particles, so it will drag water. Okay, water goes either through the transcellular pathway or through the paracellular pathway, right? There are the aquaporins which helps in absorption of water. Okay, aquaporine channels which absorbs water. Now important, very very important, right? Water secretion, it increases in some disease condition, right? Water and electrolyte secretion, it occurs maximum in the disease conditions such as cholera and diarrhea, right? Cholera, mainly in the cholera. So GI tracts also secretes the electrolytes from the blood to the lumen. The mechanism or the secretory mechanisms are located in the crypts of the liberum, and absorptive mechanism are located in the villi. Okay, chloride secretion into the interstitial lumen is through the chloride channels. Okay? There are the chloride channels which helps in secretion. Chloride secretion is mainly into the interstitial lumen. It is transported through the chloride channels by the cyclic AMP dependent mechanism. Okay, and when chloride is secreted, then sodium also moves along with the chloride. Okay, sodium also moves along with the chloride to maintain the electrical balance. When sodium and chloride moves, water also flows to maintain the isosmotic condition. Right? So this is mainly important in the disease conditions such as cholera toxin. Okay, cholera toxin. So whenever the person suffers from the cholera, there is the excessive secretion of chloride. Okay, there is excessive secretion of chloride, and when chlorides are secreted, sodium also moves, water also moves, and there is excessive loss of fluid. There is excessive loss of fluid, almost 20 liters per day. Okay, and almost 20 or more than that, 20 liters per day of the fluid is secreted. So this cholera toxin, it catalyzes the adenosine diphosphate ribosylation. Okay, so it increases the intracellular level of the cyclic AMP. Okay, right? Cholera toxin, it is also asked in the exam. Okay, what cholera toxin does is it increases the cyclic AMP level in the cell. Okay, when cyclic AMP level in the cell is increased, then the chloride channel, they open for the longer time. Okay, right? The chloride channels, they open for the longer time. When chlorides, they open for the longer time, then sodium and water also moves, and it leads to the secretory diarrhea. Right? It leads to the secretory diarrhea. Right? This has been asked in the MCQs also. Cholera toxin, what it does, it increases the intracellular cyclic AMP level. Right? It increases the intracellular cyclic AMP level. When cyclic AMP is increased, then chloride channels open for a prolonged time. Okay, chloride channels open for the prolonged time. When chloride channels open, sodium and water flows, and it leads to the diarrhea. Okay, it leads to the diarrhea. Then absorption of the other substances such as vitamins. Okay, other substances, vitamins. So fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, K. they are incorporated into the micelles and they are absorbed along with the other lipids. Okay, through the terminal ileum, they are absorbed. Okay? They are absorbed. Then most of the water soluble vitamins, they are absorbed through the sodium dependent co-transport. Okay, they are absorbed through the sodium dependent co-transport. Then vitamin B12, it is absorbed through the ileum. Okay, vitamin B12, it is absorbed through the ileum and it requires the intrinsic factor. Okay, it requires the intrinsic factor. When there is gastrectomy, okay, if there is gastrectomy, then there is the loss of the parietal cells. When there is the loss of the parietal cells, then intrinsic factor is not secreted. So if intrinsic factor is not secreted, then vitamin B12 is not absorbed, which leads to the pernicious anemia. Okay, which leads to the pernicious anemia. Right? So vitamins, they are absorbed in the ileum through the sodium dependent mechanism. Okay, sodium dependent mechanism helps in absorption of the vitamins, right? With the sodium. So vitamin B1, B2, they are absorbed in the jejunum. Vitamin C, it is absorbed in the ileum. Vitamin B12, it is absorbed in the terminal ileum. Right? So this is the vitamin B12. Right? This is the vitamin B12. So vitamin B12, it is vitamin B12 is absorbed. Okay, vitamin B12 is absorbed. It binds with the intrinsic factor that is secreted from the parietal cells. So it binds with the vitamin B12, and once it binds with the vitamin B12, it goes and it is absorbed in the terminal ileum. Okay, terminal ileum have the receptor for the intrinsic factor and it is absorbed. Right? Vitamin B12 is absorbed in the terminal ileum. Then absorption of the calcium. Okay, so absorption of the calcium, it is dependent on the presence of the vitamin D3. Okay, 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, it is required for absorption of vitamin D3, which is produced by the okay kidney produce. So 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, it is produced from the kidney and it helps in insertion of the cal binding protein. Okay, right? It helps in insertion of the cal binding protein. Right? So cal binding protein, once it comes, it helps in absorption of calcium. Right? So if there is deficiency of vitamin D due to renal failure or inadequate intestinal absorption, then it will cause to rickets. Right? Rickets in children, and it causes osteomalacia in the adults. Right? Then absorption of iron. Right? Absorption of iron. So vitamin calcium, it is absorbed in the duodenum. Iron is also absorbed in the duodenum. Okay, calcium and iron both are absorbed in the duodenum. So iron, it is absorbed as the heme iron. So in the interstitial cells, it is degraded to free iron. Okay, Fe2 plus. So this Fe2 plus, it is bound to the transferrin. Okay, it circulates to in the form of transferrin. Right? This iron, it is absorbed. It is bind through the apoferritin. Okay, it binds to the apoferritin. It is taken inside the cell. Then in the blood, it is transferred through the transferrin. Okay, if there is deficiency of the iron, it leads to the iron deficiency anemia. Okay. So this is the fate of the iron. Okay, so iron, it is ingested, it is actively reabsorbed. Okay, it binds with the apoferritin, it is actively reabsorbed. Once it is reabsorbed, it is transferred in the blood through the transferrin. Okay, it is transferred through the transferrin, and some of the iron, it is stored in the form of ferritin. Okay, liver stores the iron in the form of ferritin. Right? So this much for today. Right? This much for today. In next class, we'll be